Hello everyone, it's Shannon here. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we're going to make this sweet card with the adorable Rejoice Bunny set, and I'm going to show you how to combine Copics with heat embossing. I'm going to start our project with the Rejoice Rabbit combo set. It comes with the Rejoice Rabbit stamp set and the matching dies in the back. I'm going to remove the main image from this set, center it onto a scrap of 110-pound cardstock, and then pick it up with my MISTI. It is important to use a stamp positioning tool like the MISTI today for this project because after I Copic color this rabbit, I'm going to pop my cardstock back into my MISTI and then stamp the rabbit again, and the MISTI will just make sure that everything stays in perfect alignment. I'm going to ink up this rabbit in a really light ink. This is Waffle Flower's Coffee Loves Milk, a really nice light brown ink that is also Copic friendly. You can use whatever ink you have on hand. I just would recommend that it be light and definitely has to be Copic friendly. So I just inked up the rabbit. Now I'm going to stamp it down onto the cardstock, and after I stamp it, I'm going to then leave the stamp on my MISTI. You want to make sure you don't remove the stamp but leave it there because you need it for later, and that's how you make sure it's still aligned. I'm now going to move on my Copic onto my Copic coloring. I have the Copics that I'm using on screen so you can follow along. I picked out some nice light tans or light browns for this rabbit. I've been starting out with my darkest shade instead of my lightest shade, and I think it's been working out pretty good. I'm still experimenting with it though to make sure that that's what I prefer, but I usually start with my lightest shade and then work towards my dark, but I have been experimenting with starting with my darkest shade, and that's what I did here with this rabbit. So I started with E31, then I moved on to E30, which is my medium shade. I'm going to go over with this medium shade over my dark a little bit to kind of blend out that dark and get a transition going. I did think though after I finished that my dark, I kind of lost my dark too much, so I am going back over with E31 just to kind of darken up my darks a little bit. And once I finish darkening those darks, I am going to grab that E30 one more time and just blend out that transition once more. I am kind of making a great shift here for this gradation. I want it to go from that tan to the light of to the white of the paper, so it is a big jump. I'm finishing up here with a really light tan. This is E50, and this is really going to help me kind of get that transition really smooth. After I finish with that tan, I'm now moving on to my pinks. I'm starting with RV11 for the inside of the ears and the nose. Then I'm going to finish up with a lighter pink, which is RV10, just to kind of blend out those ears a little bit and add some color to the cheeks. I'm now done with my rabbit. I'm going to move on to my flowers. Starting with my pink flowers, and I'm starting with my lightest color this time. This is RV21, then I'm moving on to my medium shade, which is RV23, and then I move on to my dark shade, RV25. So this time I'm doing a little bit opposite of the rabbit, going back to light to dark. Now I'm going to blend back through, starting with my medium, blending the transition between the medium and the dark, and then my light, blending that transition between the light and the medium. I'm now moving on to my orange flowers, just two markers picked out for them, starting with YR00 and then my dark, which is YR02. Really nice, easy blend there with those two colors. Then for my yellow flowers, I kind of went like a golden yellow. I have YR31 and then YR23 for my dark. And for the center, I picked out YR04, and the center is just a teeny tiny little circle, so that was really easy to do. I'm going to do some blue flowers as well. This is BG10 and BG34, and then I'm moving on to the leaves. And I have two colors picked out for the leaves, starting with my greens, which is G00 and G02. Colored the remaining off camera. Now moving on to my other pair of colors for my leaves, which is G20 and G43. And these are kind of more on the limer side. The other green was much more kind of blue green. And I'm just going to finish the rest off camera and do this last little bit, and that will actually finish my Copic coloring. I'll hold it to camera so you can get a quick look at this. It may look a little sloppy right now, but when we add our heat embossing, which we're going to do now, it's really going to sharpen everything, and really, it has a really fun look. I kind of really enjoy this process. So for heat embossing, I popped my panel back into my MISTI. Again, I did not move that stamp, so everything's going to be perfectly aligned. Applied some anti-static powder, then inked up the stamp and VersaMark ink, stamped it, and then I'm going to pour on some gold embossing powder. It is important to do this embossing after you do your Copic coloring because heat embossing can actually damage the nibs on your Copic markers, so you do want to try to avoid coloring things that are heat embossed. So if you stamp it first, Copic color it, and then heat emboss it, you avoid possibly damaging your Copic nibs. So after I heat set my embossing powder, I went ahead and die cut it out with the matching dies. I also stamped a sentiment in gold embossing powder as well and die cut that out with the matching dies from the Rejoice Rabbit die set. Now I'm going to move on to some ink blending. I have a panel here that's slightly smaller than an A2 panel. I just trimmed off 1/8 of an inch off of the top and one of the sides of the panel, making this panel 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. I'm now going to do some ink blending. I picked out Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide, ink blending the top and bottom portion, kind of dividing this visually up into fifths. So I ink blended the top fifth and the bottom fifth. Now I'm ink blending with peeled paint Distress Oxide, kind of overlapping a little bit where the Peacock Feathers is, and then I'm moving on to the very center and I'm using Spun Sugar Distress Oxide and ink blending there. Now this does not have to be an absolutely perfect, flawless ink blend because we're going to do a ton of like splattering and ink spots and water spots on the back of this panel just to add some interest. So now that I've finished ink blending, I'm going to start with my water spots. Just sprayed some water down into my mini media mat and I picked it up with a brush and I'm just with that loaded brush tapping my finger, and that's releasing a small amount of water and really making a really fine speckly look over the panel. I'll allow that panel to dry, and once it's dry, I'm now going to move on to my ink splattering. I'm going to start with Peacock Feathers Distress ink. I'm using Distress ink instead of Distress Oxide because the ink is a little bit darker than the oxide and it shows up really well over the Distress Oxide blended background. So I just smushed the ink pad down onto my mat, added a little bit of water to it, and then picked it up with my brush, and again just tapping my finger on the brush to release that ink, and it creates a nice little fine mist of little ink splatters. It's just a really nice look. I am trying to keep this ink where its kind of counterpart is on the blended background. So here I'm moving on to peeled paint. Again, smushed it down onto the mat, added some water, picked up my brush, and you can see I'm trying to keep the splatters mainly over where that its corresponding Distress Oxide color is on the background. Here I'm moving on to my pink. I've chose Worn Lipstick instead of Spun Sugar because even Spun Sugar Distress ink is still kind of too light to really see, so I used Worn Lipstick instead. I'm now going to move on to some white watercolor paint. This is Gansai Tombi white paint, just to add some white spots, and that actually will finish my very splattery background. I'll let that dry, and I'm now going to move on to this heart. I die cut this heart out of some light cardstock using Waffle Flower's Nesting Hearts die, and I'm just going to ink blend the center of this heart with Abandoned Coral Distress ink just to add kind of some interest, and this will help my bunny to kind of pop up. I'm just checking to make sure it's visible behind my bunny, and now I'm going to move on to really assembling this card. I'm going to start with my panel here, add some liquid glue to the back side. The reason why you see grid marks on the back side of that paper is because I'm kind of recycling some slightly damaged Waffle Flower Creative monthly sheets. It's just really nice cardstock and great for ink blending and even Copic coloring on. So after I adhered that down onto the front of an A2 top folding card base, I'm now going to add some foam tape to the back side of my heart, and I'm going to stick that right down. Grab my rabbit here just to help me center that heart and make sure I have it right where it needs to be to have my rabbit centered. Now I'm going to add some foam tape to the back side of my rabbit and remove the backing on that and stick that on the heart. I'm going to have it a little bit higher because I'm going to save a little bit of room for my sentiment, which is going to be in the lower right corner of my card front. So after I stick that rabbit down, I'm going to grab my sentiment. I'm also going to pop this up, but this is a little tricky because part of it is going to hang off. So I'm only going to add a 1 layer of foam tape to the very top portion of the sentiment, and then 3 layers of foam tape to the bottom portion of the sentiment. This is just going to help to make sure it's balanced and takes into account the other foam tape layers on the rabbit and the heart. And after I stick that down, my card is done. I'll now hold it to the camera so you can get a good look at this card and check out that heat embossing with the Copic coloring. I think it really has a pretty elegant look. You can see the dimension here and our really speckly splattered background to just kind of bring it all together. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you'd like any more information on the products I used, please check out the links below in the description. You can also check out my blog or my Instagram. I'll share those links as well. And if you like this video, I would so love for you to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.